But I think over the last 5 years, as in history, political protests where people are together are very, very powerful and effective. And from a physiological perspective, they benefit from something called excitation transfer, which is the biological transfer of emotion. Your testosterone gets amplified, your dopamine gets amplified. And if it is a right-wing populist rally where you're using fear and anger to pull people up, it can be very dangerous because the testosterone and the adrenaline response can lead very quickly to aggression. If it is a far more democratic, hope-imbued kind of rally, then you are likely to have very large crowds with no disturbances, because the dopamine response, the endocrinological response that the speakers are aiming for is something which is aiming to increase oxytocin, bonding and positive neurochemical reactions. And so I think that they will always be incredibly powerful, depending on whatever your aims are. And also I think that they help to create some kind of data point that can then be used on social media to replay that rally, replay that charismatically imbued speech with music and with imagery and all of that kind of thing, which can really be very, very powerful indeed.
Yeah, I agree. I think also that when we look at protests and consider their success, that there's different ways we can do that. So sometimes it's, if it's a protest or a march, trying to effect a particular change in policy, they can fail. So we could say that they were unsuccessful. Going back to the example of the campaign for the legalization of abortion in Argentina. So the law didn't go through last year when it was voted, but 2 million people were on the street, and there's been a turning point, and there's no way back after that. The kind of changes that have happened at a cultural level, a social level, perceptions of gender, of women's rights, even if the law hasn't passed, those changes have been an outcome of the protests in the street and of people, bonding on the streets and all of these different cultural processes that are taking place. And also I think we have to look at things in perspective. So, same as with other protests, the protests against the war, the invasion of Iraq, that wasn't successful, we could say, but it has had some consequences in terms of, the political history of the country.
Yeah, I think the protests the last 5 years have quite frankly changed the world in two senses, two key senses. First of all, a party in the UK has come from nowhere and totally shifted the entire relationship that Britain has with the rest of the world. In the British voting system, that is very difficult to do, and this is frankly unprecedented. I think whatever we think of Nigel Farage and the people around the Brexit campaign, it is a phenomenal achievement that's fundamentally been driven by protest. What's also been interesting is the counter-reaction to that, which, there's been a huge upsurge of interest in actively taking part in resistance to that, which previously there was a fairly large degree of apathy. So in both senses you see an activist swell. But what's also interesting is on an international stage, this is challenging the idea of what's called the inside-outside debate. The idea that international politics is a function of the structure of the world. There's no world government, and it's the structural characteristics that drive the way the world is, have been significantly challenged by what happens within states is actually affecting what happens between states. And that is can be some ways a very positive democratic thing, as is happening in the European elections recently. But it can also be, as you pointed out, quite a reactionary thing, as we see a groundswell spreading out from, the election of Donald Trump and the rise of Farage and the AfD and so on, and assuming a momentum all of its own.
Yeah, I think they've had a very powerful effect, but they're very, very formulaic when they're used in a right-wing populist way. There is a deliberate targeting of neurochemical reactions in order to make a person look like a revolutionary, charismatic outsider, to use a certain kind of rhetoric and charm, to imbue certain kind of emotions and outcomes that make people feel fear and anger, for example, which is most statistically likely to push them to the ballot box, or to strategically manipulate those kind of endocrinological outcomes in order to shift voting patterns. So if you take, for example, the 8.4 million people who voted for Obama and then Trump, what we're seeing there really, arguably, is a recommodification of politics as entertainment and sensation-seeking, not politics per se. And that is why we also saw that there was a 50% increase in people who wish they hadn't made that vote as compared to anybody else who voted for Trump in those elections, because it was a very quick, snap, entertainment, sensation-driven, imbued, knee-jerk response, not political engagement.